I've been in the real estate industry for many years now, and I've helped more people than I can remember purchase and sell homes. So I've been around a lot, I've seen a lot. And in my experience, I have come across four types of homes that I would never buy. More than that, I wouldn't even wish it upon my worst enemy for one of them to purchase one of these homes, at least not as a primary residence. And because you all are not my enemies, but are my friends, I figured I should probably do an episode describing what those four homes are so that you know to watch out for them as well. My name is Nick. I am the host of the DIY Homebuyer podcast. Super glad that you are here. I'm going to go ahead and just say it up front. If there's anything in this video that you're like, that's good, please do give this a like or a review. That is so incredibly helpful. And the next best thing that you can do is go ahead and subscribe. Subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. And then the ultimate is if you share this with a friend. If you know somebody who is shopping for a home and you want to make sure that they don't purchase a home that I would never, ever, ever advise anybody buy, well, do them a solid, send them this episode. Without any further ado, though, let's go ahead and dive in. So, the first kind of home that I would never ever buy is a home that has major structural or foundational issues. And maybe that sounds obvious to you, but I see it time and time again, especially in these charming historic neighborhoods where you walk into a home, it might have even been a very nicely renovated home, and it is beautiful with all of the finishes and the nicely renovated kitchen. And it's so charming and historic, and there's light pouring in through the windows. And you fall in love because it's just that romantic kind of feeling. This is the dream home in the dream neighborhood. But if you start to look a little bit closer, there are some concerning signs. Cracks in the ceiling, a little bit of a slant to some of the floors. Some of the doors don't quite close right. Windows that seem to be a bit extra drafty, like they're not sealing properly. Well, all of these things are indicative of not just little settling issues, but that there could actually be something structurally wrong with the house. And when you have structural issues, especially foundation issues, that can be extremely costly. I'm talking like further from tens of thousands of dollars and closer to hundreds of thousands of dollars. I kid you not. I was working with a client in the last couple of years, and she was touring a home and asked the listing agent about just some cracks that she had seen in the basement or foundation. And the listing agent was like, "Oh yeah, no, just little signs of settling." Well, fortunately, she had a structural engineer come and look at it, and it was like, no, like the foundation was actually starting to deteriorate. The soil underneath had slipped, and it was going to be about $90,000 in order to jack the house back up to where it needed to be and reinforce the foundation where it had started to erode away. Yikes. And so she was obviously so glad that she walked away from that potential nightmare. But it's easy to look at those doors that don't quite close right, or think like, oh, like the floor, the fact that it's slanted, that's not that big of a deal. Well, it really could be. That thing that you think would be such an easy fix, it might not. So if there are any concerns about structural issues as you're walking through a home, listen to those. And at the very least, in your inspection period, if it's something you go to contract on, make sure that you have a foundation specialist or a structural engineer, somebody that really comes out and does a deep dive evaluation of the structural soundness of the home. You do not want to buy a home that has major structural issues. So that's number one. Number two, location. And this is another one that you're like, Nick, that's so painfully obvious. Come on, man, give me something. But it's wild because, again, so often I see people overlook certain things related to location, because location isn't just about like what neighborhood you're in and what amenities you're close to. It also has to do with what roads are right next to your house. How close are you to freeways and highways? What are the flight patterns of any nearby airports? Are there train tracks nearby? What kind of factories or chemical plants are nearby, and what kind of environmental toxins are those going to be putting into the air? What was on the property before your home, the home that you're looking at, was developed there? All of these things are incredibly important to consider because they have a massive impact on, one, your enjoyment of a property, and two, the resale value. Because, yeah, sure, you might think, oh, I'm going to enjoy this home forever, but nobody's lived in their house forever. Eventually, everybody sells their house, whether that's because you die happy in it and then your family has to deal with selling it. That's probably, at least selfishly, best case scenario, right? But at some point, that house is going to need to be sold. And if your home is right on a busy road, a lot of road noise, if it's hard to get in and out of, especially during rush hours, if you've got planes that are constantly flying over, trains that are honking and waking you up in the middle of the night, and that is really going to limit the pool of potential buyers for your home one day, not to mention probably severely diminish your enjoyment of the property. So don't be so enamored with the charm of a home, the amenities, the beauty of it, that you overlook just how important location is. Do not sacrifice location for anything, because you can change anything about a home except for where it's located. So do prioritize being in a location that you're going to be all right with long term, and that you think, yeah, most reasonable buyers are probably going to want to buy here as well. That's going to save you a lot of trouble someday when you go to sell your house again. The next one that I want for you to consider is poor construction and maintenance issues. This is different than just like structural and foundational problems. This is where you see evidence of like DIY home buyer, not DIY home buyer. We love DIY home buyer. That's what this podcast is. Forgive me. DIY home owner projects. And again, if you're listening to this, you're probably a DIYer through and through, which means hopefully you can be a bit honest about, not all DIYers are created equally. And there are a lot of DIY projects where people are cutting corners. They're trying to get things up as quickly and as cheaply as possible, and kind of say, quality be damned. And it is incredible how often I see this when it comes to decks and patio covers or additions or garage conversions, things that people don't pull any sort of permits for, which means there are no inspections to make sure that there's any sort of structural integrity, and people just slap these things up. My brother, in fact, is dealing with this right now, where before he bought his home, the previous owners had like done a DIY deck up at the second floor. And now, anytime he walks out onto that deck, the whole thing is wobbly, such that he knows that he's going to need to tear that thing down pretty quick and rebuild it. And that's exactly the situation that you don't want to find yourself in. You don't want to be in a position where, you think you're buying this house that has these amazing additions or features, but they're actually built really poorly, and they're more of a liability and eventual cost to you than they actually are a real benefit. So do look at the quality of construction. If there are apparent DIY projects, you're going to want to ask about permitting. Now, Oftentimes, homeowners, if they're doing it themselves, they don't pull appropriate permits, but it is a real bonus if they do. The other thing with the poor construction maintenance issues that I want you to consider is just the systems that are in the home, especially the things that are behind the walls. So, electrical and plumbing are two of the big ones that come to mind, because if you're buying a older home, especially one that was built in like the 1900s, like 1900 through 1940, sometimes even 1950-ish, you want to be looking out for knob and tube wiring or aluminum wiring. Both of these can be real fire hazards. They can make it so that it's harder to insure the house, or that if there was a fire, insurance isn't going to cover it. And replacing electrical gets very costly very quick, because either you're having to open up walls significant, get down to the studs on things to fully rewire a house, or it becomes a very, very tedious job for an electrician to try and fish new wires, pull old stuff out. I mean, again, we're talking 30, 40, 50, 60, $70,000 easily, if not more, depending on the total square footage of the house. And you want to think about the same thing with your pipes, just knowing what kind of materials are in there, what's the expected lifespan of those materials, because the only thing worse than having to replace your pipes is having your pipes burst or break, causing massive water damage throughout your entire house, and then having to replace your pipes. So, electrical and plumbing are things that home buyers often just don't take a close enough a look at. They don't take them into account, the cost of needing to replace those things. And I don't want for any of you to make that mistake. So if I'm looking at a house where there's original wiring and original plumbing, that's a major red flag. And the seller better have accounted into their pricing the cost that it's going to be to me, the future owner, to replace those things. But here's the thing. Most sellers, they don't account for the cost of those things, because they live in the world of, hey, it all works. What's the problem, right? And of course, we all understand that mindset, but when you're going to be taking on the financial risk of those things, yikes, 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 yikes. So do take a very close look at what's going on behind the walls as best as you can. Get a feel for what kind of systems are in place and what the potential costs of those are going to be in the future. And the next one that I want to address is legal complications. Now, legal complications, what in the world does that mean? Well, there's a few things here. The first one is just title. So, does the seller have the right to sell the property? What kind of liens and debts do they have against the property? And ensuring that all of those things get paid off before you take ownership, right? If there are tons and tons of debts, if the debts on the property exceed the value of the property, that is another major red flag, unless somehow the seller is able to pay all of those things off. Because if they're able to somehow wiggle out or finagle, pull one over the title company, guess who gets stuck with those remaining debts? You do. They stick with the property, and you do not want to be foreclosed on for somebody else's debt. God forbid that happen. You also want to know, are there easements on the property? What kind of rights have been given away when it comes to either mineral rights or water rights? These sound like very boring things, but they have huge consequences. There's a big farm property that's actually just down the street from me, and the farm is probably going to need to shut down because they didn't do a close enough look at their water rights, and they don't have the water rights to the water that's on their property, which means that then they're having to pay exorbitant amounts for water from the city, and they can't can't afford that with their farming operation. So again, most of you probably aren't looking at buying farms, but you still want to have a good idea of, okay, what are the rights? What are the limitations that you have? What kind of easements do you need to be aware of? But then even zooming out from the property that you're looking at, you want to know what's going on legally with all of the properties around you, or at least most of them. And this is especially true if you're buying a home that has any kind of view or green space. I cannot tell you how many times, especially when I was working in new construction, that I would see home buyers pay premiums of $100,000, $150,000 for a green space lot or a lot that backed up to a golf course. And then 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later, there was an announcement that, hey, actually, that golf course that you were so excited to be backing up to, that's being sold and it's going to get redeveloped into a whole new housing development. And now you're going to have neighbors that are right behind you. And some of that, it's just hard to predict, right? Like, I don't know that there's anybody necessarily hiding anything. But if you are buying a home that has some sort of a view, you really do want to see, okay, what are the parcels around me? Is there a house that's behind me that is a single story right now, but it's old and outdated, and maybe someone comes in with deep, deep pockets and they knock it down and they end up building a 3-story mansion that then is going to block my view? How does that change the value proposition of the property that you're looking at buying? Those are all things that are really good to research, to look deeper into zoning, proposed developments. What is the likelihood that things around the property that you are wanting to buy get sold? So definitely look into that. And then the final one, this is somewhat tied to location, right? It's actually kind of, I'm giving it the 4.5 because I think I've done 4 already. You can probably hear it in my voice. It's late to be recording a podcast episode here, but I'm coming through for you all. So again, if you appreciate that, please do give a like and subscribe because I'm showing up. But what I'm going to title is point 4.5 is it floats underneath the category of location as well as zoning legal issues. Title is what's going on with environmental factors around your property, especially flood zones, because flood zones are very real. and the 100-year floodplains, we often think like, well, that'll never happen. But they call it a 100-year floodplain because it happens about once every 100 years. And so if it hasn't happened in recent memory that area flooded, well, that means that the time is really ticking and that it very well could happen in the next 5 or 10 years while you're inside of the house. And often if you're buying a home in a flood zone, it's very difficult to insure, very expensive to insure, and can be a total loss. Similar to if you're buying a home that is up on a hill, you want to make sure that that home is structurally reinforced or fixed into bedrock so that if there is ever any erosion or slippage, your house doesn't go down. You want to be thinking about liquefaction zones, again, depending on where you're living and where you're buying, but just thinking about, okay, earthquakes and fault lines, and what does that mean for the location of any given property, as well as things like fire hazards, hurricanes. Wherever you're at in the United States, there are going to be different environmental factors that you need to consider, but you definitely want to look into those things because it could be the most incredible home on planet Earth until that 100-year flood comes through and wipes it out because that home was built smack dab in the middle of the floodplain. So that's perhaps a freebie, but definitely one that I encourage you to consider. In summary, What are the four homes that I would never, ever, ever encourage anyone to buy? A home that has any sort of serious structural or foundational issues. It just becomes so freaking expensive. And you think that it might just be a small deal, but those problems only get worse. And if you don't address what's happening at the foundation, it's going to create all kinds of just a myriad of other little, very annoying and very costly problems until you deal with what's happening structurally or in the foundation. So avoid those. Number two is location. Don't buy a home near a busy street or backing up to a highway or a freeway. Don't buy a home where there's airplanes constantly flying overhead or trains that are flying by just behind the house. It's going to really diminish your enjoyment of the property, and it's going to make it very hard to sell in the future. The third piece there is be weary, leery, be leery of any sort of DIY projects, check on permits, and also really think about home maintenance issues. What are the things that the homeowner just never did and left original to the house? And what does that mean in terms of the original systems? What do you have in there for electrical, for plumbing? What's going on with the windows? All of those things can again be, we're talking high tens, if not low hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix and replace. Number four is legal, title, financial, just making sure that all liens are paid off, that you have a good understanding of easements and what kind of rights you have with the property, what kind of things are going on zoning wise around the property, making sure that if you have a view, that's a protected view and you're not going to lose it. And number 4.5 is those environmental risks of what kind of risks do you have when it comes to flooding, earthquakes, fire, you name it. All right. So keep all of those in mind as you are shopping for a house. Of course, I always say, get a qualified home inspector to check things out for you. And again, they're home inspector, they're a generalist. Like they are going to look at everything, but they're a master of none. And so they will tell you, hey, you should really have the mold remediation mold specialist out here to look at this. You should really have a structural engineer to check out this. You should have a roofer come to look at the roof. Anyway, they're going to give you all of that feedback. And if they tell you to have further inspections, highly recommend that you do it. Research the neighborhood thoroughly. See if you can talk to neighbors. Most people love talking about their neighborhood and both the pros and the cons. And so if you can catch, go for a walk around the neighborhood and just see who you can catch out walking their dog or hanging out in the front, and just start to ask them some questions of, hey, how long have you lived here? Do you like living here? Do you know of any future developments? You'd be surprised how many people do have their ear to the ground and a pulse on what's happening in their local neighborhood, just how much information you can pick up by talking with them. And most importantly, trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. And I know that it is hard to walk away from a home that seems so promising and so beautiful and that you can imagine just being so happy in. But I am telling you, the romantic notions that we have about the enjoyment of a house, those disappear real quick when you got foundation issues, when you constantly have noise from freeway or busy streets around you, when you're driven crazy by what the previous owner did DIY style, and also horrified by the bill of having to replace electrical. And, I can imagine few things worse than buying a home for a view that you're wanting to enjoy, only to find 6 months later that high-rise apartments are going to be built right behind you instead. So check into all of those things. And if something in your gut is just saying, yeah, this is too good to be true, then listen to that, honor that, and the search will continue. The right home is out there, even if you just got to be a bit more patient. All right, that is what I got in this episode. For anybody who has made it this far, I'm telling you, you gotta come and join the DIY Homebuyer Academy. It's what I host for free on School. It's been so fun engaging with the folks in that community, seeing them go along their DIY home buying journey, saving big time money, not having to hire a costly buyer's agent, and just enjoying a more educated and empowered home buying experience. So if you want to learn more about buying a home without being dependent on somebody else, check that out. Links are in the description below, but it's school, SKOOL.com/DIY homebuyer. Join us there. Last thing before you go, hit subscribe, hit like, hit review, 5 stars, please. That means the world. And once again, share this episode with a home buying friend of yours to prevent them from making perhaps one of the greatest mistakes of their life. They will love you for it, and so will I. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in the next one.